If someone had told me my new job would begin with a lie that would change my life, I would have laughed. Instead, I walked into Eastern International on a rainy Monday morning, carrying a cheap umbrella, a secondhand laptop bag, and enough anxiety to power the entire city. My name is Elena Brooks. I'm 24 years old. I grew up in a quiet town in Ohio where everyone knew everyone. Moving to New York wasn't just a career decision, it was a promise I had made to myself, a fresh start, a better future, and hopefully, a paycheck that would finally stop my landlord from calling every Friday. Eastern International was nothing like I had imagined. The lobby looked more like a five-star hotel than an office building. Marble floors, glass walls, fresh flowers, people walking with the kind of confidence I wished I had. Meanwhile, I was trying very hard not to trip over my own shoes. "Relax, Elena," I whispered to myself. "You've survived job interviews, student loans, and your aunt's Thanksgiving cooking. You can survive this." At least, that's what I thought. My first week disappeared in a blur of meetings, passwords, software training, and enough paperwork to build a small mountain. Everyone worked fast, really fast. I was constantly 2 steps behind. Every evening the office emptied while I stayed behind trying to understand another spreadsheet or another company report. 2 weeks later, nothing had changed. 5 o'clock arrived. Desks slowly became empty. Conversations faded. Elevator doors opened and closed. One by one, everyone went home. Except me. I rubbed my tired eyes and looked at the glowing monitor. There has to be an easier way to organize these numbers. "There definitely is," someone answered. I nearly jumped out of my chair. Standing beside my desk was Daniel, the company's senior accountant. He was probably in his 50s and had the kindest smile in the entire building. "Still here?" he asked. I was hoping nobody noticed. He laughed. "Oh, everybody noticed." "Really?" "They're placing bets." My eyes widened. "Bets?" He nodded seriously. "Half the office thinks you'll quit before Friday." I stared at him in horror. Then he burst into laughter. "I'm joking." I let out the biggest sigh of relief. That wasn't funny. It was a little funny. I couldn't help smiling. For the first time all day, I actually laughed. Daniel pointed toward my monitor. "You're making this much harder than it needs to be." Within 5 minutes, he showed me a shortcut that saved almost an hour of work. I stared at the screen. "That's it?" "That's it. I spent 3 nights doing this manually." "I know." "You knew?" I watched. "You could have helped earlier." "I wanted to see how stubborn you were." I couldn't believe it. "I officially don't like you." He grinned. "That means you're officially part of the team." For the first time since joining the company, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I belonged here. Then, the entire office suddenly became quiet, really quiet. Daniel looked toward the hallway. "So," he finally came back. I frowned. "Who?" Instead of answering, everyone who was still working quietly sat a little straighter. Keyboards stopped clicking. Conversations disappeared. Even the air somehow felt different. I slowly turned around. A tall man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit walked through the hallway with calm, confident steps. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Everyone knew exactly who he was. Matthew Casper, founder, CEO, the man whose name was printed on every company report I had spent the last 2 weeks reading. He wasn't loud, he wasn't dramatic, but somehow, every room changed the moment he entered it. And without realizing it, I held my breath. The office stayed silent until Matthew Casper disappeared behind the frosted glass doors of the executive floor. Then, everyone breathed again. I blinked. "Does that always happen?" Daniel chuckled. "Every single time." "Is he really that scary?" Daniel shrugged. "Not scary. Just impossible to read. He doesn't waste words. He doesn't smile much. And he notices everything." I looked toward the executive offices. "Everything?" He nodded. "Everything." I laughed nervously. "Well, that's comforting." It wasn't, not even a little. The next morning started like every other morning. Coffee, emails, a growing to-do list, and me trying to remember at least 20 new passwords. By lunchtime, I finally felt like I had everything under control. That feeling lasted exactly 12 seconds. "Miss Brooks?" I looked up. The CEO's executive assistant stood beside my desk. "Mr. Casper would like to see you." My heart immediately skipped a beat. "Me?" "Yes." "Are you sure?" She smiled politely. "I'm very sure." Every head in the department slowly lifted. Someone whispered, "Good luck." Another person quietly added, "Don't panic." That wasn't encouraging. At all. The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than my entire workday. I checked my reflection in the shiny elevator wall. My hair looked acceptable. My shirt wasn't wrinkled. Good enough. The assistant opened the office door. "Mr. Casper will see you now." I stepped inside. His office was surprisingly simple. Large windows overlooked the New York skyline. A bookshelf filled one wall. Everything else was neat and organized. Matthew looked up from a stack of documents. "Please, have a seat." His voice was calm, professional. I sat carefully. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he slid a report across the desk. "You prepared part of this financial summary." It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." I noticed several improvements. I blinked. He noticed? "I had some help from Daniel." "I know." That answer surprised me. He actually knew who had helped me. "I also noticed," he continued, "that you stayed late 4 nights in a row." I smiled awkwardly. "I'm still learning." "That's obvious." I almost stopped breathing. Was that criticism? Then he added, "But effort matters." "You can't teach effort. You either have it, or you don't." For the first time, his expression softened just enough to seem human. "I appreciate people who keep trying." Relief washed over me. "Thank you, sir." He closed the folder. "One more thing. Tomorrow's industry conference. I need someone to organize my presentation files." I looked behind me. Surely he meant someone else. "There isn't anyone else in the room, Miss Brooks." "Oh, I meant, I'll do it." "Good." He returned to his paperwork. I waited. Was the meeting over? After several quiet seconds, he looked up again. "Is there something else?" "No, sir." "Then enjoy the rest of your afternoon." I stood quickly. "Thank you." As I reached the door, he spoke one last time. "Miss Brooks." I turned around. "Welcome to Eastern International." For a moment, I forgot every rumor I had heard about him. Maybe, just maybe, the company's most intimidating CEO wasn't as cold as everyone believed. I smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Casper." Little did I know, tomorrow's conference would change everything. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, not because I was excited, because I was nervous. Today was the company's annual industry conference, hundreds of business leaders, journalists, investors, and somehow, I was responsible for preparing the CEO's presentation. I arrived at the office almost an hour early. To my surprise, Matthew was already there. Who gets to work before sunrise? Apparently, my boss. His office door was open. He was reviewing documents while drinking what looked like his first cup of coffee. I knocked gently. "Good morning, Mr. Casper." He looked up. "Good morning, Miss Brooks. The presentation is ready." I handed him the folder. He carefully flipped through each page. No expression, no reaction, just complete focus. Finally, he closed the folder. "Excellent work." I blinked. That was it? Coming from him? It felt like winning an award. "Thank you. We're leaving in 15 minutes. I nodded. "I'll meet you downstairs." The conference center was enormous. Bright lights, television cameras, people in expensive suits discussing markets, technology, and business strategies. I suddenly felt very underdressed. I quietly followed Matthew through the crowd. Every few steps, someone stopped him. "Matthew! Congratulations on last quarter's results." "Good to see you again." He greeted everyone politely, but never stayed in one conversation for long. He was clearly here to work, not socialize. I admired that. Backstage, I organized his notes while checking the microphone schedule. Everything looked perfect, or so I thought. A young event coordinator came running toward us. She looked completely panicked. "Mr. Casper, the keynote speaker scheduled before you is stuck in traffic." Matthew looked at his watch. "How late?" "At least 20 minutes." She looked ready to cry. "The audience is already seated. We have live television. What are we going to do?" Matthew stayed completely calm. "Move my presentation forward." The coordinator froze. We can't. The cameras aren't ready." Matthew thought for a second. Then he looked at me. "Miss Brooks." "Yes?" "I need a favor." My stomach dropped. "What kind of favor?" He smiled. A tiny smile, the first real smile I had ever seen from him. "Keep everyone entertained for 5 minutes." I stared at him. "I'm an analyst." "Exactly. I'm not a television host." "You'll do fine." "No, I really won't." He handed me a wireless microphone. "I believe you will." Before I could protest, the stage manager announced, "You're on in 30 seconds." 30 seconds? I wanted to disappear. The curtain opened. Hundreds of people looked toward the stage. My hands were freezing. I took one deep breath, then another. "Good morning, everyone." My voice sounded much smaller than I intended. A few people smiled encouragingly. That helped. "My name is Elena Brooks. I promise I wasn't supposed to be the first speaker today." Laughter spread across the room. Good. At least they were smiling. So, while everyone is wondering why I'm standing here, I've been wondering the exact same thing. This time, the laughter became louder. Even the camera operators smiled. The tension disappeared. For the next few minutes, I shared a few lighthearted stories about my first weeks at Eastern International. Nothing personal, nothing embarrassing. Just funny moments about learning a new job. People laughed, they applauded, and most importantly, nobody seemed annoyed by the delay. From the side of the stage, I noticed Matthew watching quietly. For the first time, he looked genuinely impressed. The event coordinator hurried over. "We're ready." I smiled. "Perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, the person you actually came to see, Mr. Matthew Casper." The audience applauded enthusiastically. As I walked off stage, Matthew quietly stopped beside me. "You saved the morning." I laughed softly. I was making it up as I went. "Sometimes," he said, "that's exactly what confidence looks like." Then he walked onto the stage. I stood backstage watching the audience listen to every word he said. Without realizing it, I smiled. Maybe this job was becoming more than just a fresh start. Maybe it was becoming the beginning of something I never expected. The conference ended with a standing ovation. Not for me, for Matthew. His presentation was confident, practical, and surprisingly easy to understand. As people gathered around him after the event, I quietly packed our folders into my bag. Mission accomplished, or so I thought. The next morning, something felt different. The moment I stepped into the office, conversations stopped. Again. "Oh no," I whispered. "What happened now?" Daniel walked over carrying his coffee. He looked far too amused. "You've become famous." I absolutely do not want to hear that sentence. He handed me his phone. Someone had posted photos from yesterday's conference. One picture showed Matthew speaking on stage. Another showed me introducing him. The headline read, "Who is the young employee standing beside Eastern International's CEO?" I sighed. Well, at least they spelled my name correctly. Daniel laughed. "You've got the right attitude." I wasn't so sure. By lunchtime, people from departments I had never visited suddenly knew who I was. "Great job yesterday. You looked so confident. You handled the audience really well." I smiled politely. "Thank you." Inside, I wanted to hide under my desk. Around 3 o'clock, my phone buzzed. "Mr. Casper would like to see you." I walked upstairs. This time, I wasn't nearly as nervous. When I entered his office, he was reading the same online article. Without looking up, he asked, "Have you seen this?" Unfortunately, yes. He placed the tablet on the desk. "I apologize." I looked confused. "For what?" "The attention. It wasn't your fault." I smiled. "I survived." A small silence followed. Then, for the first time, Matthew laughed, not loudly, just a quiet laugh. "I've noticed something." "What?" "You stay surprisingly calm." I raised an eyebrow. "That's because I panic on the inside." He actually smiled. "I suspected that." Just then, someone knocked on the door. It was Daniel. "Sorry to interrupt, but I think you'll both want to see this." He held up his phone. Another article had just appeared. This one was even stranger. "Eastern International's CEO finally learns to smile?" Below the headline was a photograph. Matthew was looking at me. I was laughing. And somehow, the camera had captured the exact second he smiled too. Daniel couldn't stop laughing. "I've worked here 12 years. I've never seen that expression." Matthew looked at the picture, then at Daniel. "I'd appreciate it if this never appeared in tomorrow's staff meeting." Daniel nodded seriously. "I make no promises." Later that afternoon, the office coffee machine suddenly stopped working. For most companies, that wouldn't be a crisis. For Eastern International, it absolutely was. People gathered around the machine like engineers studying a spaceship. "It's broken." "No kidding." "Did anyone call maintenance?" "They're coming." "When?" "No idea." The room filled with dramatic sighs. Matthew happened to walk past. He stopped. "What happened?" Daniel answered with complete seriousness. "We've experienced a coffee emergency." Matthew looked at the broken machine, then at 20 employees standing around it. Finally, he said the last thing anyone expected, "I know another coffee machine." Everyone stared. "There are two?" "There has always been two." Silence. Daniel blinked. "Where?" Matthew pointed toward a small hallway. "The employee lounge." Nobody moved. Then suddenly, 20 adults sprinted toward the second coffee machine. I couldn't stop laughing. Matthew quietly looked at the empty hallway. "They never read the building map." I covered my mouth, trying not to laugh harder. "You've known this the whole time?" "Of course." "And you never told anyone?" "I assumed they knew." I laughed so hard that tears formed in my eyes. Matthew simply shook his head. "I suppose communication could be improved." For the second time that week, I saw the serious CEO accidentally become the funniest person in the building. And somehow, he still didn't realize it. By Friday afternoon, I thought the week couldn't possibly surprise me anymore. I was wrong. Very wrong. I had just finished organizing a stack of quarterly reports when my phone buzzed. "Mr. Casper would like to see you." I grabbed my notebook and headed upstairs. When I entered his office, he was standing by the window, reading through his schedule. Without turning around, he said, "Do you have plans tomorrow evening?" I blinked. "Not really." He nodded. "Good." I waited. "Tomorrow, Eastern International is hosting its annual charity gala. I'd like you to attend." I looked behind me. Again, there was still nobody else in the room. "You mean me?" "Yes." "I've never been to a charity gala." "That's fine. I don't even own the right clothes." His expression remained perfectly calm. "The company has a dress code service for official events." I couldn't hide my surprise. "That's actually impressive. It saves everyone time." The following evening, I stood outside one of the most beautiful hotels I had ever seen. Crystal chandeliers sparkled through the glass entrance. Elegant music floated through the lobby. Guests smiled as photographers welcomed them. I whispered to myself, just breathe. This is only a dinner. It definitely doesn't feel like only a dinner. Inside, Matthew was already greeting several guests. When he noticed me, he walked over. "You made it." I almost turned around twice. "I'm glad you didn't." He handed me a small event booklet. "Tonight is simple. We're here to support children's education programs. We'll greet our guests, attend dinner, and leave." I smiled. That sounds easy. Famous last words. Halfway through the evening, the host stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, before dinner, we'd like to invite a few guests to share a short story about someone who inspired them." People applauded. The host looked toward our table. "Our first guest, Mr. Matthew Casper." Matthew calmly walked onto the stage. He spoke for only 3 minutes. No dramatic speech, no flashy presentation, just a sincere message about how one good teacher had changed his life. The room applauded warmly. As he returned to his seat, the host smiled again. "And now, we'd also like to hear from Miss Elena Brooks." My fork froze in midair. "What?" The audience applauded. I looked at Matthew. He looked just as surprised as I was. Quietly, he leaned toward me. "You don't have to." I took a deep breath. "No, I think I do." I walked onto the stage. The bright lights made it impossible to see everyone's faces. Oddly, that made it easier. I smiled. I'm not a professional speaker, so if I forget what I plan to say, I hope you'll forgive me. A few people laughed. I relaxed. When I was growing up, my parents taught me something very simple. They said success isn't measured by how many people know your name. It's measured by how many people are grateful that you crossed their path. The ballroom became completely quiet. I've only worked at Eastern International for a short time, but I've already seen people helping each other every single day. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness changes someone's entire week. So, tonight, if you have the chance to help someone, take it. You may never realize how important that moment becomes. For a second, nobody spoke. Then, the entire ballroom stood and applauded. I felt my face turn bright red. As I returned to the table, Matthew quietly pulled out my chair. "That," he said, "was the best speech of the evening." I laughed softly. "I thought yours was better." He shook his head. "No. Mine was about business. Yours was about people." For the first time, I realized that behind the serious CEO was someone who genuinely listened. And maybe he wasn't the only one changing. Maybe so was I. Monday morning arrived, and for the first time since joining Eastern International, I wasn't nervous about coming to work. People smiled when I walked through the lobby. Someone held the elevator for me. Even the security guard greeted me by name. It felt nice. Maybe I was finally becoming part of the company. Around 10 o'clock, Daniel appeared beside my desk carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I brought peace offerings." I accepted one. "What did you do?" "I may have accidentally volunteered you." I slowly lowered the coffee. "For what?" "The company charity committee." I stared at him. "Daniel." "Yes?" "I've been here less than a month." "I know. I don't even know where the supply closet is." "You'll learn." Before I could protest, an email appeared on my screen. "Community Outreach Committee meeting, 11 a.m. I looked at Daniel. He smiled innocently. "I've decided I don't like you again." "Excellent." The meeting room was already full. Employees from different departments were discussing ideas for the company's annual community project. One person suggested donating computers, another suggested planting trees, a third suggested organizing career workshops for high school students. The discussion went in circles. Nothing seemed to excite anyone. Then, the conference room door opened. Matthew walked in. Everyone immediately sat a little straighter. "I won't take much of your time," he said. I only have one question. If we help our community, how do we make sure we're solving the right problem? The room became quiet. Nobody answered. Without thinking, I raised my hand. Every head turned toward me, including Matthew's. I hesitated. If we want to help, we should ask people what they actually need. Silence. Then Matthew nodded. Go on. My confidence slowly returned. Sometimes companies spend money on projects they think are helpful, but the community may need something completely different. What if we listened first? A few people began nodding. Someone started writing notes. Matthew looked around the room. I like that idea. Let's organize listening sessions before making any decisions. Several managers immediately agreed. The meeting ended with more energy than it had started. As everyone packed their notebooks, Matthew stopped beside me. Miss Brooks. Yes? Thank you. For what? For reminding us that good ideas usually begin with listening. I smiled. My grandmother used to say that. She sounds wise. She was. That afternoon, news spread through the building. Not about me, not about Matthew, about the new community project. Employees were excited. People from every department volunteered to help. Daniel walked over with another coffee. You've started something. I just answered a question. Exactly. Just before 5 o'clock, the office receptionist hurried into our department. Mr. Casper? There's a little girl downstairs asking to see you. Everyone looked surprised. A little girl? Someone whispered. Matthew calmly stood. I'll be right back. Curiosity filled the room. Nobody knew who she was. 5 minutes later, Matthew returned. Beside him walked a smiling 8-year-old girl carrying a handmade thank you card. She shyly handed it to him. My school asked me to give you this. Thank you for helping our library. Matthew accepted the card with both hands. You're very welcome. She smiled. I like books now. So do I, he replied. After she left, the office remained unusually quiet. Daniel looked at me. I've worked here 12 years. I've never seen him keep a thank you card. Matthew carefully placed the colorful card inside the top drawer of his desk. He noticed everyone watching. It's important, he simply said. Then he quietly returned to work. At that moment, I realized something. People admired Matthew because he was successful, but the people who truly knew him respected him because he never forgot why success mattered. And without realizing it, I found myself smiling again. Maybe the best stories about a person were the ones nobody talked about. Tuesday morning began like any other. Coffee, emails, meetings, spreadsheets, everything felt comfortably normal, and somehow, that worried me. Life had taught me one important lesson. Whenever everything feels too peaceful, something unexpected is usually waiting around the corner. Around 11 o'clock. Matthew called me into his office. I have a project for you. He handed me a thick folder. Our company is preparing a proposal for one of the largest education partnerships we've ever pursued. I carefully opened it. This looks important. It is. I'd like you to review every number before tomorrow morning. I nodded confidently. I'll have it ready. Back at my desk, I spent hours checking every page, line after line, column after column. Everything seemed correct, or so I believed. Late that afternoon, I proudly emailed the completed file. Finally, something I could finish without asking Daniel for help. I smiled. That feeling lasted about 15 minutes. My phone rang. Miss Brooks. Matthew's calm voice came through the receiver. Could you come upstairs? His tone wasn't angry, but it wasn't relaxed either. My stomach immediately tightened. When I entered his office, the proposal was already open on his desk. He quietly pointed toward one page. Would you look at this figure? I leaned closer. For a second, I didn't notice it. Then, my heart sank. One number had been copied into the wrong section. It wasn't a huge mistake, but it changed one important calculation. "Oh," I whispered, "I'm so sorry. I honestly don't know how I missed it." The room became very quiet. I waited for disappointment. Or criticism. Instead, Matthew calmly closed the folder. "Everyone makes mistakes." I looked up, surprised. "The important question is, what do we do next?" I blinked. "We fix it." "Exactly." He smiled faintly. "Then let's fix it." For the next hour, we worked side by side. No blame, no frustration, just problem solving. When the corrected proposal was finally finished, I let out a long breath. "I really thought you'd be upset." Matthew leaned back in his chair. "When I started this company, I made mistakes far bigger than this." "You did?" He nodded. "More than I like to admit." I couldn't help laughing. "That actually makes me feel better." "It should." As I stood to leave, he said something I didn't expect. "Miss Brooks." "Yes." "You apologized immediately. You stayed. And you fixed the problem. That's far more valuable than pretending mistakes never happen." His words stayed with me. Not because they made me feel better, but because they reminded me that growth wasn't about being perfect. It was about taking responsibility. The next morning, the proposal was approved. The client loved it. Everyone celebrated. Daniel walked over holding a small paper bag. "Congratulations." "What's this?" He smiled. "Victory donuts." I opened the bag. Inside were 6 colorful donuts. I laughed. "There are only 2 of us." "I know." I was optimistic. Just then, Matthew walked past. Daniel immediately offered him one. To my complete surprise, Matthew actually accepted. He looked at the pink frosting, then at us. "I've never had one of these." Daniel nearly dropped his coffee. "What? You've never eaten a donut?" Matthew calmly shook his head. "I've been busy." Daniel looked at me. "We need to fix this immediately." A few seconds later, the CEO of a billion-dollar company was standing in the break room, trying his very first donut. He took one bite, paused, looked at it, then quietly said, "I understand the popularity." The entire room burst into laughter. Even Matthew smiled, and somehow, that simple moment became everyone's favorite office story. For the first time in years, the people at Eastern International didn't just see their CEO, they saw a regular person enjoying an ordinary Tuesday, and somehow, that brought everyone a little closer together. The following Friday, Eastern International felt different, not because of another major client, not because of another business deal, because someone was celebrating a birthday. Daniel, the unofficial heart of the accounting department. For 12 years, he had quietly helped everyone. He never asked for recognition. He simply showed up. Every single day. Around noon, I noticed employees disappearing one by one. Files were being carried into the conference room. Boxes appeared. Balloons. A large chocolate cake. I smiled. Nobody told Daniel, right? The receptionist grinned. "He's completely clueless." Perfect. At exactly 3 o'clock, Daniel walked back from a client meeting carrying his usual cup of coffee. He stopped in front of the conference room. The lights were off. He frowned. "Did the power go out?" Someone quietly pulled him inside. The lights came on. "Surprise!" The entire office cheered. Daniel stood frozen. His coffee nearly slipped from his hand. "You remembered?" One of the managers laughed. "We could never forget." Daniel looked around the room. His eyes became slightly watery. "You people." I was only gone for 20 minutes. The celebration was simple. Cake, music, laughter, stories from years of working together. People shared funny memories about Daniel. One employee admitted, "I accidentally deleted an important report my first week." Daniel stayed after work helping me rebuild the entire file. Another added, "He once drove across town during a snowstorm just to deliver forgotten documents." Everyone laughed. Daniel scratched the back of his head. I don't even remember half of these. Then, someone cleared their throat. Matthew stood near the front of the room. The conversation stopped. He rarely spoke during office celebrations, which made everyone curious. He looked at Daniel. When people describe a successful company, they usually mention numbers, buildings, profits. He paused. I disagree. A successful company is built by people who quietly help others succeed. His eyes met Daniel's. You've done that every day, for 12 years. Thank you. The room immediately filled with applause. Daniel looked completely speechless. Then, Matthew reached into his jacket pocket. I have one more surprise. He handed Daniel a small envelope. Daniel carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter and 2 airline tickets. Daniel looked confused. Matthew smiled. You've postponed your vacation 6 times. I checked. So, the company finally made the decision for you. You and your wife are taking 2 weeks off. Everything has already been approved. The room exploded with applause. Daniel stared at the tickets. You did all this? Matthew simply nodded. You've earned it. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Daniel laughed. I suppose I don't have much choice. You really don't, Matthew replied. The entire room laughed. Later that evening, most employees had already gone home. I stayed behind helping clean the conference room. Matthew walked in carrying the last empty box. You don't have to do that. I smiled. I know. But everyone worked together today. So I thought I should too. He nodded thoughtfully. You've noticed something. What? The strongest teams aren't built during meetings. They're built during moments like today. I looked around the now empty room. The balloons, the paper plates, the crumbs from the cake. Oddly, it all felt meaningful. I think you're right. He smiled. And I think you've become an important part of this company. For a second, I forgot what to say. Only a few weeks earlier, I had walked into this building feeling completely alone. Now, it felt like home. As we switched off the lights and walked toward the elevator, I couldn't help smiling. I had come to New York looking for a career. Instead, I was slowly finding something much more valuable, a place where I truly belonged. Monday morning, the office was unusually busy. Everyone seemed excited. The education partnership proposal had officially been approved. It was the biggest project Eastern International had accepted all year. There was only one problem. The company now had exactly 3 weeks to prepare everything. Every department suddenly moved twice as fast. Phones rang non-stop. Meeting rooms stayed full. Even Daniel, despite being on vacation, somehow managed to send everyone encouraging emails. Around 10 o'clock, Matthew gathered the department heads. This project will affect thousands of students. We're not just meeting deadlines, we're creating opportunities. His words filled the room with purpose. Then he surprised everyone. I want Elena to coordinate communication between every department. Several managers looked at me. I looked behind me. Surely there was another Elena. There wasn't. One manager smiled. Excellent choice. Another nodded. I agree. I almost laughed. A month ago, most people didn't even know my name. The following days became the busiest of my career. I carried folders from one department to another, answered countless emails, solved scheduling conflicts, listened to concerns, helped teams communicate. Every evening, I walked out of the office completely exhausted. But, for the first time, I loved being tired, because I knew my work mattered. One afternoon, a supplier unexpectedly canceled an important delivery. The entire project was suddenly at risk. The conference room became silent. Everyone started suggesting complicated backup plans. Matthew calmly listened. Then he looked toward me. What do you think? I took a deep breath. I think we already have people we trust. Let's call our smaller local partners. They may not be the biggest companies, but they've always delivered when we needed them. The room became quiet. One manager smiled. That's actually a great idea. Within an hour, the problem was solved. The project stayed on schedule. As everyone left the meeting, Matthew stayed behind. "You've earned everyone's trust." I smiled. "I think they've earned mine too." He nodded. "That's exactly how good teams work." 3 weeks later, project launch day finally arrived. Everything worked perfectly. Students received new learning materials. Teachers thanked our volunteers. Parents smiled. The event ended with applause. As everyone packed up, Matthew walked over holding a small envelope. "This isn't from the company. It's from me." I looked surprised. Inside was a handwritten note. "Thank you for believing that kindness belongs in business. Never lose that." There was no expensive gift, no dramatic speech, just a few sincere words. Somehow, they meant more than anything else. I looked up. "Thank you." He smiled warmly. "No, thank you." For the first time, neither of us said anything. We simply smiled. Sometimes, the best conversations don't need many words. And standing there, I realized something. I had come to New York searching for a better job. Instead, I had found wonderful friends, a place where I belonged, and someone who had quietly changed my life simply by believing in me. As we walked out of the building together, the city lights stretched across the streets ahead. For once, the future didn't feel uncertain. It felt full of possibility. The end.